crunching. Hey guys, so we're back from Cletus and Cars. I got a video out for you guys of our whole event. I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it turned out pretty good. Had a great time. We're definitely going back next year, 100%. So I put Carmen up on the lift yesterday and was just kind of inspecting her for damage or anything that may have gone haywire, and I hadn't caught it or noticed it or anything like that. My plan is to make Carmen's street legal, and then we can take her to car shows and stuff. Obviously with the rear end welded shut, they can't cruise her down the highway long distances or anything like that, but you know, little cruise-ins and things like that would be cool to take her to. And there's a big car show up in Michigan we go to every year. I think I'm going to take her up there if I can get her buttoned up in time. Anyway, when I had her on the lift yesterday, I noticed a little bit of liquid on the bottom of the harmonic balancer. So I did a little bit of inspection there. I was a little concerned it might be the front main seal. It wasn't. It's actually the water pump weep hole. Now, that is a typical GM issue. They have that little weep hole there. When the seals go out in the front bearing, then they just start to weep a little bit of water out of there, antifreeze, and then that tells you, hey, you need to change this thing. Now, I never changed the water pump on this because I didn't even know if it would run. If you remember from our previous video, I just cleaned it up and bolted it on there and it worked, and I'm like, hey, cool. And we rolled with it. Got us through 2 burnout competitions and, you know, a handful of burn-offs out here in front of the shop. So I'm definitely happy with the use that I got out of that water pump. So I went to our local O'Reilly's. Actually, I called them, and they were able to get us a water pump the next day. I ordered it yesterday, picked it up this morning. It came with a new gasket. I always try and buy an extra gasket for a couple of bucks, just as cheap insurance in case it gets dropped in a bucket of oil or lost or ripped or who knows what's going to happen. You get it all ready to go on there and you drop it, and now you need a new gasket. So it's cheap insurance to buy an extra gasket. For some reason, everybody has that gasket listed, but nobody seems to be able to get one. At least not, you know, within a week. And I'm putting this water pump on today. So anyway, we don't have an extra gasket, so we probably should not screw that up. Now, I did need to check and make sure I got the right water pump. It calls out for 2 different water pumps, one for a car with and one for a car without air conditioning. This car actually originally had air conditioning, like most cars did, especially fancy electra 225s. But obviously there was an option for without air conditioning. The only difference there is going to be the length of the shaft on the water pump, because the cars with air conditioning have 2 pulleys, or have a pulley for 2 belts. Cars without only have a pulley for 1 belt. So I just pulled the belt off, loosened the alternator, got the belt off, and kind of went down in there with a tape measure and kind of measured to make sure. The difference in the shaft length is like 1 inch. So I mean, it's pretty obvious that we have the right one here. The other thing I've done is I got this little jiggle siphon. I slide it all the way down to the bottom of the radiator there, and then I can drain all my coolant out into empty jugs that I usually have laying around for just such occasions. And then I can reuse all my coolant. I don't have to toss it out, especially that coolant, because I've got water wetter in it and, you know, antifreeze. So, you know, stuff, you know, don't throw money away if you don't have to. That works really, really good for thermostats, upper radiator hoses, Poland intake, water pumps, anything like that where you need to crack open the water system or coolant system. You can do that, and the only time that you really have any issue is if you do like a bottom radiator hose. You will still have a little bit of antifreeze down there, but you can save at least 90% of your coolant and then just pour it right back in. Anyway, yeah, so to do this job, all I really got to do is loosen up this fan shroud, kind of move it out of the way, pull our fan off. I need to pull our fan off, our spacer, get our pulley out of there. There's that pulley I was telling you about. See how tall that pulley is? That's why we need that longer water pump. And then I can pull this alternator bracket off because it actually bolts to the front of the water pump. And then I should be able to just pull the half dozen bolts out of the front of that water pump, jerk it off of there, and we can get to installing this new one on here. So I'll hop to that, and I'll be back in just a few. Alright guys, so I got the fan and the fan shroud out of here, as you can see, and I got this alternator bracket off and kind of tipped the alternator out of the way. You can see here where it was just throwing water all over the side of the alternator and all over the power steering pump over here. Looks like to get to these two bolts here on the front of the water pump, you could do it without pulling this belt off, but it's going to be a lot easier if I pull that belt. So I'm going to loosen up this power steering pump, get this belt off of here just so we got a little more access to the water pump. And then basically I just need to bust all these bolts off of here. You can see where it was kind of dripping down here on the harmonic balancer. The weep hole on these is just down up underneath the back side of here. I don't even know if I can feel. Yeah, you see how slimy it is there? Come on. That's the top, and that weep hole's just right there. That's where it's leaking out of. So, anyway. Stinks, but it is what it is. Right in there's that little seal. It is going bad on us. So, we'll keep on plugging away. Now the cool thing about these water pumps, guys, is you don't have to unhook any of these hoses or these hoses here like a regular small block Chevy or a big block Chevy. You just pull all these bolts out of the front of here and it should pop right off of there. I got all the bolts out. Now you do have, 4 long bolts that go all the way through and help hold the case on there. Other than that, you got your one long bolt here that goes to the alternator bracket. Everything else is just little tiny 7/16 bolts. It should pop right off there. Oh, I have to get a screwdriver. Maybe this screwdriver's thin enough to get started. Just trying to. Come on, baby. There it goes. Gotcha. There it is. If I flip this over, you guys can see there it's got a bunch of crud in that hole, and that's where it was seeping out of. So, yeah, definitely bad water pump. I'll get this surface all cleaned up here with a razor blade, and we'll get to working on tossing a new one in there. Everything in there looks real clean though. I mean, that's not all gunked up or any buildup or anything, so the engine's probably pretty clean inside. It's not pumping a bunch of garbage around that trashed the pump or anything like that. This engine's sitting for so long, I mean, that is something that could happen. It could have been full of rust and corrosion and all kinds of other slime. And I did not flush this engine. I just, we went with it. It started and ran good, and I said, hey, let's do this thing. So check this out. This is the new pump, and that's the old pump. They're both supposed to be for cars with air conditioning. This pump looks way longer right here, doesn't it? Look at that. Now, what I did is I measured from the base out to the end there. I eyeballed it with the old tape measure here, and they look to be roughly the same. So then what I did is I took my water pump here, and I open my vise up and I set it down on my vise so it's nice and flat here. It's got a nice flat surface. And then I've set my pulley right down on top of here. And I've measured from the base to the center of each one of my pulley grooves. I only use one of them. I can't remember which one off the top of my head, but I only use one of them, but that should put them both in the same spot. So I've done that with both water pumps, and they're basically identical. I mean, this one may be off like a 1/16 of an inch. I mean, it's really close. So I'm like, that's weird, but this one clearly is visually longer than this one. Here, get it to sit the same so they kind of look the same position. So I think it is an optical illusion. If you look here, you can see how the radius on the back side of this pump, and there's a bunch of shaft exposed there, where over here that radius is hidden and there isn't any shaft exposed. So I think this housing is longer, but I think that the actual water pump location is still the exact same. The back looks the exact same. I mean, I don't know. Worst case scenario is I guess I got to go back and order the other pump and wait another day, but I'm going to clean the front of the engine up. We're going to stick this on here without a gasket or anything. I'll just put like 2 bolts in it, and then I'll toss the pulley on there, and we'll see if everything lines up with the belt and the alternator. As long as it does, I'll tear it back off and slap a gasket on it. I got those bolts in there and I got that snugged up, and I've set our belt on here. If I move this hose out of the way a little bit for you guys, I think you can see when I pull this up so that the alternator is tight like it should be. This belt is in line with this pulley just fine. I've seen them where, I mean, you can run them off quite a ways before they start chucking belts. I run this at pretty high RPM for long periods of time into burnout, so definitely want mine lined up really good, and it looks great. So this pump is going to work. I'm going to pull this stuff back off real quick, and we'll slap a gasket on here and start bolting this thing back together. Got a little Permatex on the old gasket there just to help it out. I got a little bit of alcohol on my rag here. Just going to wipe this surface off just a little bit. Let that kind of air dry. And we'll slap this here water pump back on there. And this has been off long enough that all the drips are done. So the surface should be nice and dry now. Don't see any chunks of anything on here. Hardest part's just going to be getting everything to line up, since this has got 87 holes in it. So I'll put all the bolts in, get them all started first, and then we'll go back and snug them all. It's got to sit right on this little pin, right like that. I'm just going to run these in far enough that I can let go of this without it flopping around, but it's not tight. About like that. And I can start lining up all the rest of my bolts. Pretty handy that they got that little locator pin on the bottom side of that pump that helps line that up. And then put this one in. That alternator bracket bolt. It lines up, so that's good. We got a bunch of long ones and we got 2 short ones.
To determine where the 2 short bolts went, all I did was look at the timing cover housing, and you can see how deep the threads are when you put the bolts through the water pump. And I found the 2 with the shortest threads, and that's where I put the 2 short bolts, and then the long bolts just went in all the other holes.
So we got all the bolts to line up and go in. I am going to snug all the little ones. Stand this just slightly. That one I can't see. One's hard to get to. Okay, then we'll go. You don't want to over tighten these. Sure, crack that aluminum housing. Or strip any of these bolts out. Because all these little bolts are just going in aluminum threads. Double check the big ones, and I'm saying that's done. Put my alternator bracket on. Okay. Now we just got to put our alternator bracket on. Okay, so next thing, power steering pump. Belt back on. Good to go. Got that. So I need to put my fan shroud and fan back on. And put this pulley around here just so it's already down in there. Not in our way anywhere. Once we get the fan and the fan shroud and everything tightened up on there, then we can tighten this alternator, tighten this bolt, and our alternator belt will be nice and tight, and we can dump the coolant back in this baby. Fire it up, let it warm up, make sure we got no leaks. We should be good to go. All right, got her filled up pretty far. We're gonna fire her up here, and then top her off on fluids. This is going to wrap up the water pump on old Carmen here. Just going to keep an eye on it for the first couple heat cycles, make sure no leaks develop. Other than that, I'm going to call it fixed. Now, I am waiting on a wiring harness for Carmen so we can make her street legal. Headlights, taillights, turn signals, all the essentials. I'm also waiting on some brake parts so we can hook rear brakes back up on Carmen. I got a brand new master cylinder coming just because this one's pretty crusty. And I mean, it works, but I'm not going to depend on that crusty old thing on the street. It's fine in a burnout pit, but we're going to be out in traffic. And anyway, stay tuned for those episodes or videos or whatever you want to call them. Content coming for you guys. We're going to put a line lock for the rear brakes. I'll show you guys how to do that so you can run either your front brakes or your rear brakes, shut them on and off when you want to. If you're going to do line lock for drag racing, or you want to do a burnout pad or something like we're doing here, shut the rear brakes off completely. But So keep your eyes out for more content coming. Remember to like, share, subscribe, tell all your friends. The channel is really growing, taking off. I really enjoy hanging out with you guys and putting these videos together for you. So anyway, I'll quit babbling here and I'll get working on the next project, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Until then, keep on wrenching. Peace.